questions, raise your hand. I believe we have, Dreama will be checking chat, and I think we have Kayla on as well. So just stop us if you have questions, and then we'll also, if there's anything we don't get to today, we will post it on the Marion County Community Services website. So a few things of just kind of where we're going today. We're going to be talking about who qualifies, both in terms of agencies as well as individuals. How do you verify qualification? What costs are covered? What services do you need to provide? What about HMIS? What if survivors need to move? So these are all things we're going to be covering today. So let's start with the who. Who qualifies and how? Dreama, take it away.
Okay, according to 24 CFR 578.3, first of all, everybody knows what CFR 578 is, right? Nobody knows. That is the Hearth Act. That is your golden rule for all things CoC. So a victim service provider means a private nonprofit organization whose primary mission is to provide services to victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Also, trafficking is in there. Trafficking wasn't a known issue when the Hearth Act was written. So this term includes rape crisis centers, battered women's shelter, domestic violence transitional housing programs, and other programs such as CoC, permanent housing, permanent supportive housing, and rapid rehousing. So on your project application, question 6 is going to be, is your organization or subrecipient a victim service provider defined in 24 CFR 578.3? You have to answer yes on this if you want to be considered a domestic violence program.
Okay, we covered this last week, but wanted to reiterate this. So the DV-based definition of homelessness has been revised. I personally am very excited about this. This was a long time coming. So the actual definition, notwithstanding any other provision of this section, the Secretary shall consider to be homeless any individual or family who is fleeing or is attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or other dangerous or life-threatening conditions in the individual's or family's current housing situation, including where the health and safety of children are jeopardized, and who have no other residence and lack the resources or support networks to obtain other permanent housing. What does this mean? It means individuals fleeing or attempting to flee due to domestic violence no longer have to be classified as chronically homeless. Corporate cheer.
I think that was an excellent decision. Long time coming change.
Rid of all of it. Okay, we're going to have some glitches. We'll get there. Okay, here you go, Dreama.
Okay, necessary documentation. Appropriate DV involve qualifying documentation. And this is for the survivor to prove they're a survivor. So documentation of the original incident of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, include written observation by the housing or service provider, a letter or other documentation from a victim service provider, a social worker, a legal assistance provider, pastoral counselor, mental health provider, or other professional from whom the victim has sought assistance or medical, or hang on, I gotta move my chat box, or medical or dental, court or law enforcement records. I thought that said dental. So a doctor's report, something from the court, something from the police, something from their pastor. Somebody somewhere has to document that, a third party, professional. Does everybody understand? You can't just take somebody's word that they're a victim. Okay.
So what can funds be used for? What isn't allowable? So the requirements, number 1, this is so important. You'll hear this multiple times throughout the presentation. You're required to have housing as part of your project. All projects must have housing included in it, such as rapid rehousing, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, or permanent housing. If you're not familiar with each of those means, Dream and I are going to be working on doing another webinar. We'll probably just record it on our own and then push the link out to for it, but we'll hopefully get that out fairly soon. So keep in mind, you have to have a housing component. You also have to have your DV specific HMIS, safety planning, case management, emergency transfer plan, and confidentiality. Don't worry, we're going to get into the specifics on those. Just wanted you to have one screenshot where you can see everything that you have to have in your projects. Dreama, take it away.
Okay, case management. The cost of assessing, arranging, coordinating, and monitoring the delivery of individualized services to meet the needs of the program participants are eligible costs. Component services and activities for case management consist of counseling, developing, securing, and coordinating services, using the centralized or coordinated assessment as required in the HARF Act by your CoC, obtaining federal, state, and local benefits, monitoring and evaluating program participant progress, providing information and referrals to other providers, providing ongoing risk assessment and safety planning with victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking, and developing an individualized housing and service plan, including planning a path to permanent housing.
Hey, is everyone doing good up to this point? Please let us know if there's something. We will have an official question and answer at the end, but if there's something that stumps you along the way, just actually I'd say raise your hand, but I can't actually see that. Type it in the chat. But emergency transfer, who qualifies for an emergency transfer? Only those under the imminent threat of harm. So imminent threat of harm, what is it? It must be from the threat of harm from further domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, which would include threats from a third party, such as a friend or a family member of the perpetrator of the violence. So keep that in mind. It does not have to be the person that originally created the incident, the abuser. It could be somebody else, and they can be making threats. HUD requires that the program participant provide appropriate documentation of the original incident of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, and any evidence of the current imminent threat of harm. So your documentation for imminent risk.
Can I stop you just a second? I want to go back just a second. So what that, just to break down the confusion, there's two types of documents you're going to need before you can ever do an emergency transfer. You're going to need the original documentation of the original abuse, and then you're going to have this documentation of an imminent threat. I'm sorry, Stacey, go ahead.
No, please do. Is that clear? I cannot see anybody. Last time I couldn't transfer forward and backwards because I had your faces up. This time I have no faces up, so I can't see if anyone's lost. Sorry. So the documentation you're going to need to show imminent risk of further harm, it can include sorry, I thought we had a question. Okay, documentation of reasonable belief of further domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking includes written observation by the housing or service provider, a letter or other written documentation from a victim service provider, social worker, legal assistance provider, pastoral counselor, mental health provider, or other professional from whom the victim has requested assistance, or it could be a current restraining order, recent court order, or other court records, or it could also be law enforcement reports or records. The documentation could be from the housing or service provider that you can include documentation such as emails, voicemails, text messages, social media posts, and other communication. Because of the particular safety concerns surrounding victims of domestic violence, the interim rule provides that acceptable evidence for both the original violence and the reasonable belief include an oral statement. And this oral statement does not need to be verified, but it must be documented by a written certification by the individual or head of household. Dreama.
VAWA Emergency Transfer Plan. Everybody has to have an emergency transfer plan in their agencies. So survivors can request an emergency transfer for their household in a covered housing program if they, one, expressly request the transfer and you reasonably believe there is a threat of imminent harm from further violence if they remain in the same unit. Or in the case of sexual assault, the sexual assault occurred at their housing during the 90-day calendar period preceding the date of the transfer request. Public housing agencies and other covered housing programs must adopt an emergency transfer plan based on a model plan from HUD. And this emergency transfer plan must, among other requirements, allow you to make an internal emergency transfer to a unit where you would not be categorized as a new applicant when a safe unit is immediately available. A safe unit is a unit that you believe is safe. That's HUD's language.
I have a question on that. So
Okay.
would that mean if you have one property, would that mean that, could that mean simply just moving into a different unit?
It could if you felt like that unit was safer than the other unit. If you have just one property, you might want to call your housing authority and see if they have an available unit and you pay the rent for that unit. Or
Okay.
another service provider or somewhere. If the perpetrator has already found this person in that unit and it's like an apartment complex, I don't think moving them across the hall is going to save them.
April, it might make more sense when we'll get through a few other things that VAWA covers, the emergency transfer plan. So that might connect the dots a little bit more. But if it doesn't, please let us know. Dreama, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Emergency transfer facilitation. Emergency transfer costs, and this is a line item in your budget. Emergency transfer costs cover moving costs, which is assistance with reasonable moving costs to move survivors for an emergency transfer. Travel costs, assistance with reasonable travel costs for survivors and their families to travel for an emergency transfer. This may include travel costs to locations outside of your CoC's geography. Meaning, can you send them back to Missouri, back home to mama? Yes, you can fly the whole family back there as long as it's safe. Sorry. And security deposits. Grant funds can be used to pay for security deposits of a safe unit the survivor is transferring to via an emergency transfer. Even if it's in Wyoming and you're not, you can still pay that security deposit to keep them safe.
Another thought. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. This is continued. Recipients and sub-recipients of grants for tenant-based rental assistance may use grant funds to pay amount owed for breaking a lease if the family qualifies for an emergency transfer under your transfer plan.
So here's a few more uses of emergency transfer funds. You can use it for utilities. It can be paid for cost of establishing utility assistance in the safe unit the survivor is transferring to. For housing fees, grant funds can be used to pay fees associated with getting survivors into a safe unit via emergency transfer, including but not limited to application fees, broker fees, holding fees, trash fees, and pet fees where the person believes they need their pet to be safe. Dreama, take it away.
All right, emergency transfers continued. Housing navigation. Grant funds can be used to pay staff time necessary to identify safe units and facilitate moves into housing for survivors through emergency transfers. And technology to make an available unit safe. Grant funds can now be used to pay for technology that the individual believes is needed to make the unit safe, including but not limited to doorbell cameras, security systems, phone, internet service when necessary to support security systems for the unit. So that's a pretty good deal.
And then another piece of the emergency transfer, we somewhat hit on this. If a program participant moves outside of the continuum, keep in mind, you guys are the continuum. It's not just Marion County Community Services. Anyone receiving HUD funding through your continuum of care, you are part of the continuum. So the continuum may pay moving costs, security, deposits, and the first month rent for another unit. However, the continuum would have to organize assistance with the relevant continuum of care for the program participant if rental assistance is to continue outside of the continuum. The program participant may be transferred to a rental assistance program in a different continuum without having to become homeless again, so they don't have to requalify. The recipient may also limit the movement of the assistance to a smaller unit if this is necessary to coordinate service delivery. So April, this, not to call you out, is this making sense of how it comes together that you can transfer them if it's safe of another unit within your property, but you can also, you have a lot more options than that.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, Dreama, take it away.
Confidentiality requirements. Covered housing providers, that would be you all, have specific obligations to maintain the confidentiality of the fact that a person is a survivor of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Any information you provide under VAWA's housing protection, including the fact that they are a VAWA survivor, must be kept confidential by the service provider. These obligations include keeping any such information out of a shared database. In other words, you cannot use public HMIS, you have to use a DV-specific HMIS. And do not disclose such information to others unless they consent in writing to such disclosure. I wouldn't even go that far if I was a DV provider. In just a second, I'll tell you a story why. And it is required for use in an eviction proceeding or the law otherwise requires it. If their information is used by a covered service provider in violation of the confidentiality requirements, they may file a complaint with HUD. So the story I was going to tell you on with a consent in writing to such disclosures, I wouldn't even do that unless it was with the police or with an attorney, the victim's attorney only. I had an incident one time at the Salvation Army where the worker at the Salvation Army's wife left him and went to a DV provider, and nobody knew it. So his next day at work, he got the HMIS and saw that she'd presented for services and was passed off to a DV provider. So he, working at the Salvation Army, was able to call the DV providers, found out where his wife was, and broke in and beat the snot out of her. And that, I mean, she didn't consent to the information, but if somebody's desperate like that, they will go to any length to find out where their person is. So it's better just to keep it all quiet and all under wraps and not even share information with other service providers. Does that make sense? As a safety precaution. Did I lose you all?
That
Wake
makes
up.
sense. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I wouldn't go with the consent unless it's with the victim's lawyer or the police. And then I would have to have a written consent to share information with them.
Okay, so in addition to having the DV specific HMIS, as you know, like Dreama was saying, you don't want to put any personally identifying information in the public, like in the more standard HMIS. But not only that, in your budget items, you can include things for data entry, staff, computers, cell phones. There's a long list. So when you're creating your budgets, look at this link. It's 578.57. Again, that is in the Hearth Act. So look at what your eligible costs are so you can include it there. How can you complete your proposal as a DV provider? There are a few nuances for you. The first of which is a little bit backwards, quite honestly. You will be scored as to how you answer these questions, but HUD may not be prompting you to answer them. So think about what you have to address as you're writing your narratives, even if it is not asked specifically. So here's the things that you need to make sure your narratives are explaining. How your agency will develop and implement strategies for corrective actions and remedies to ensure VAWA and DV-specific compliance. Program evaluation of confidentiality policies, practices, and procedures. Training on compliance with VAWA confidentiality requirements. Reporting to CoC, collaborative applicant, HUD, and other interested parties on compliance with VAWA confidentiality requirements. Costs for establishing methodology to protect survivor information. Staff time associated with maintaining adherence to VAWA confidentiality requirements. Okay, Dreama.
So SF 424 for DV providers. This is very important. If you missed all the rest of the slides, pay attention to this one. So you are required to enter in your application in ESEPs, you're required to enter an address for all properties for which funding is requested. If the location is not yet known, you can enter the expected location of the housing units. For scattered site or single family housing, or for projects that have units at multiple locations, you should enter the address where the majority of units and beds will be located. If the project uses tenant-based rental assistance, and if the address for scattered site or single family homes housing cannot be identified at the time of application, enter your address for your administration office. Well, let's just scratch all that. If you're a DV provider, put in a P.O. box to keep yourself anonymous. If you don't have a P.O. box, go get a P.O. box. It's very important that you don't use your agency's address or any of the housing addresses. Just use a P.O. box.
Okay, so we just threw a lot of information at you guys. Please tell us where, and I haven't been looking at chat. I don't know if someone can see if there's any questions that
Yeah, I think we hit chat as they came up.
Okay. But let me know, are there any things that we've addressed that you don't fully understand? Any slides you want us to go back over? What questions do you have on this content?
At Shepherd's Lighthouse, we're doing the renewal. Huh?
There's a lot of feedback there.
At Shepherd's Lighthouse, we're doing DB renewal.
Okay.
And what we're trying to find out is how to break down the budget. Because in the past, we've done it for operations, supportive. There's a certain amount for admin and for rapid rehousing. And it looks like we have to do it even further.
You can't change your budget unless you have permission from HUD. You can't change any of your renewal grants unless you have permission from HUD. The little thing in the projects that comes up all checked because it says you were making changes, that is because you didn't import your grant from last year when you registered. That's the reason you're getting that. But you can't change any of it. What would you change?
No, I think that what we're trying to figure out, if we wanted to go for these additional funds, do we have to do it as a new project? And I think that's what you just answered. It would have
Yes, yeah, you have to do a new project.
new budget, new taglines, new
Whole
budget.
new world. Yes, ma'am. You had to go through the whole gambit.
An extension?
Yes, you can do an extension.
Okay.
So you would have two. You would have your renewal of your existing project, and then you would do your expansion program as well.
Okay.
Because we found that since the DV center is closed, we've been putting in more hours with DV clients, a tremendous amount of hours that, is not covered by the current DV situation. So,
We wondered where these folks were going.
Ma'am?
I said,
Ma'am?
we were wondering where those folks were going to go.
Well, here at Shepherd's Lighthouse, we've housed quite a few of them. I think we're down to, what did we say, 5
I think
that's
they
left
have
out
8
there.
left, and 2
Yeah.
of them are waiting on lists to be signed.
So, but that's beside the point. I was wondering as the executive director, is there any way that we can recoup some of that case management hours, like as an extension?
Yes, do an expansion project and go for it.
And
Cover your costs and your staff and everything.
is there any particular amount that would be, how do we come up with the amount that, that we would need to put in there for expansion?
I would say, let me look at your ARD. Hang on one second.
Thank you, Dream. I was going to look it up, and I was scared I guess you don't really have to see the slide deck anymore anyways.
Oh, don't be afraid. Look it up. There you go.
I know you might.
I gotcha.
We'll let Dreama do that, because otherwise I might mess up the power. Well, it doesn't matter at this point, unless you need to go back to it.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I can't spell today. Florida.
Dreama's so sick today, so the fact that she's doing this is amazing.
I know. I just woke up stuffy. So your DV bonus is $239, $233. That's HUD dollars. That does not count your match.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
That's what I thought it said for the days, 241.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Dreama, Stacy, do you guys have like 2 minutes after the call just to stay on really quick?
Absolutely. Okay, well, it sounds like there are no more questions, so we will officially end this webinar. The recording will be made available. So if you want to reference it again, as well as the slides, and let us know if you need any technical assistance. Otherwise, we will most likely be getting another webinar out in the near future, recording just on the different, Gwendolyn, I see your hand. Dr. Dawson, so go ahead.
I just had a quick question. We're not applying for any of the DV bonus funds, but I wanted to know what role we would play as the housing authority with any agency who does apply for the funds. And right now, if an individual is a public housing or HCB participant, we have an MOU with other housing authorities. But as far as any non-housing authority agencies, the individual, let's say you get someone in a DV family and they're not a participant in the housing authority and you needed another unit through the emergency transfer. I don't have a problem. I don't mind entering into an MOU, but it would be for one of our market rate open market units and not a public housing unit and
Right.
not subsidized through ACB. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. So what part do you see us playing in this other than just any open market units we might have?
Any open market units would be great. Just working with the service providers. As the housing authority, you should already have an agreement in place with the continuum as a whole that you will assist in any way possible if that's getting
We do.
202
Yeah.
vouchers for the elderly or, that kind of thing. So that MOU should absolutely cover domestic violence if they have somebody needing an emergency transfer.
Okay. Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure the other agency representatives were aware it wouldn't be a public housing unit or a Section 8 voucher if they're
Right.
not already on the program.
Well, they would
Okay.
have subsidy already through the continuum to continue covering their client, because you cannot tell clients where to live.
Right. Absolutely.
Unless you're the housing authority and they have a project-based voucher.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions? Going once, twice. Okay, we will have this recording available. Let us know if you have any other questions that come up. Otherwise, thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.